Hello and welcome to this video where we are going to do a deep dive into the new responsive engine in Bubble. In fact, this is the second video in a mini-series I'm doing on this responsive engine where I'm comparing it to traditional HTML and CSS and checking whether I can do everything that's possible in HTML in Bubble or whether I will face any challenges or need to take any workarounds. If you haven't watched the first video, this would be a good chance to do so because we built some stuff that we are referring to now. But of course, it's also fine if you just want to follow along, so have fun. All right, so we are going to pick it up where we left off the last time. I did this rather basic HTML, CSS based layout in Codepen. I will put the link to the Codepen in the description below so you can look it up and copy paste if you like. Again, this layout is rather simple. It consists of an outer container and 4 inner containers, and I've used some CSS to style these containers, as you can see here. Both of these containers, the outer container as well as the inner container, is a flexbox container, and the flex direction is row for each of those, meaning that the main axis inside of these containers is the horizontal one and the cross axis would then be the vertical one. What we are going to do now is, well, we'll play around a little bit with this layout, we'll modify a few settings, and then we'll jump to Bubble and see whether we can rebuild everything that we just did with HTML and CSS in Bubble without any code, or whether there are any challenges and whether we need some workarounds for those challenges. All right, I'm looking forward to it. I hope you are too, so let's go. First, we are going to remove the height of the outer container and set the flex direction to column, which makes the main axis the vertical one, so each of those inner containers aligns along the vertical axis. We've set flex grow to 1, which tells these inner containers to grow along the main axis of the outer container. If we, for example, change the height back to 800 pixels, you can see that these inner containers, they grow if the outer container grows, if the available space increases, although these inner containers have been set to a height of 150 pixels. They don't stick to that height, they simply grow because we've set flex grow to 1. So if we remove it, they'll shrink back, they default back to 150 pixels. Okay, so now let's add a few more properties here. Justify content. Justify content determines, as I've commented below here, the alignment of the children of the flexbox along the main axis. So in that case, the main axis is the vertical one because the flex direction is column. So justify content will determine the alignment of the children along the vertical axis. So flexent will put them at the bottom of the outer container, but of course more values are possible. So instead of flexent, we could also say center, which would put them right in the middle, and still everything stays, well, quite responsive. Back to Bubble. We can do the very same thing here. So we're going to select the outer container, and the container layout of the outer container has been set to row initially. Container layout is, well, basically what flex direction is in CSS. Container layout is in Bubble. That's not 100% correct because we have this fixed and align to parent properties. We are going to ignore those for the time being. We will focus on row and column, and here we've set it to row initially. Now we are going from row to column, which means changing the main axis to a vertical one, right? Just like that, pretty much the same in CSS. And of course, in order to be 100% compliant to what we did with HTML and CSS, we need to change the height to 800 pixels right here. So as you can see, these inner containers, they do not grow automatically to take up all the height that's available to them because, well, apparently the flex grow property, if there is one, is not set to 1. But we can modify the container alignment. We did that in CSS by setting the justify content property, and here it's container alignment. So container alignment is basically what justify content property is in CSS. We are telling Bubble how to align the children of this box that we've selected here, of this element that we've selected here, along the element's main axis. In that case, the main axis is again the vertical one because the container layer is column, so container alignment determines the placement along the vertical axis. Just like that. Okay, so now we'll go through each of those inner containers and have a closer look at those. We have a minimum width of 150 pixels and a maximum width of infinity, which basically lets these inner containers grow in width as much as they can, right? Although the horizontal alignment of these inner containers is set to align left here, they grow as much as possible. So if we make the width fixed, then the horizontal alignment matters, right? Because this inner container is now aligned to the left-hand side of the outer container. If we remove the check mark, it goes back to normal. We can set it to stretch. It doesn't make a visual difference, but we'll come back to that one later on. So let's set everything to stretch here. Again, it doesn't make a difference because we haven't set any max width, but again, we'll just do it right now and come back to it later on. Back to Codepen, we can do a little bit more experimenting here because what we just did was easily doable in Bubble. Now we'll try out some more stuff with HTML and CSS. Up to now, we played around with justify content. Justify content determines the position of the children along the main axis. And now we'll introduce align items. This property determines the position of the children along the cross axis. So in that case, the cross axis would be the horizontal one, right? So I'm putting align items to the outer container, and each and every inner container, each and every child of this outer container will be affected by the setting. So by setting it to stretch, I'm basically doing the same as I just did in Bubble, right? And also nothing changes, but there will change something if we set align items to flexend. It's interesting that we do have the same settings as in Bubble. So the inner containers do have a min width of 150 pixels. They do not have a max width, just like in Bubble. But in that case, the inner containers, they look different, or the behavior is different than in Bubble if we set align items to flexend. In Bubble, this had no effect. Here it has an effect. This is not a problem per se, but it's just something to get used to, right? And again, we can set different values for this property align items. We could do flex start, which we put them to the left-hand side. We can make them centered or go back to stretch. But for now, we'll go for align or flex end. All right, flex grow, setting flex grow to 1, again, just to show you the effects of this, will make those inner containers grow along the main axis of the outer container, although again, the height is set to 150 pixels. But we'll delete this flex grow property. Here, it's nothing we need. We'll get back to Bubble and try to replicate the same thing. And here, if you select the outer container, you can see that there is no option to do the very same thing we just did in Bubble. Because, well, container alignment is basically justify content, but there is no setting that's equivalent to align items. Not on the outer container. In order to align the children along the cross axis, we need to go and modify the children individually. This is a big and huge difference in Bubble, which took me some time to get used to be honest. So let's see how this works out. So outer container, there's nothing to do for us. We need to select the children individually, right? Container alignment, well, this apparently is not the right option. This basically tells Bubble that the children of the inner container, how they should align along the main axis, which is the vertical one here. This is not a setting we are searching for. Sorry, the horizontal one. We need to go to horizontal alignment of this child and set it to right aligned. Just like we did in CSS, but for some reason there's no change here. In order to make this change visible, we need to make this element in Bubble fixed width. Right, this is another difference here. We had the very same setup in CSS, a minimum width, no maximum width applied, and it worked, right? There was an effect. It doesn't have any effect in Bubble. So let's make it fixed width. And here we go, right? Now it's right aligned. We do the very same thing for the second container and for the third one, right? Just like that. So this looks pretty similar to what we just did in CSS and HTML. So let's go back to Codepen and do some more stuff. We are going to modify the minimum width of these inner containers, set it to 125, and we are going to change the flex direction to row, which makes the main axis the horizontal one now, right? And well, justify content always refers to the main axis, so it's centered along the horizontal axis, and it's put towards the end of the vertical axis, which is the cross axis right now. Okay, so we are going to change that. So the placement along the cross axis should be flex start. So we will move up here and we'll let those items grow. So by setting flex grow property to 1, they grow and take up the available space until, well, the maximum width of the outer container is reached, set to 1200 pixels. And also they can shrink because we are allowing them to shrink. So the minimum width of the outer container is 320 pixels and the minimum width of these inner containers is 125 pixels. So we can go smaller and smaller here until we finally have a line break. And if we go wider, then this line break disappears. So now we are going to introduce some media queries. And what we want to do is we want to make the layout behave differently depending on the available screen width. All right, so we are going to set this media query for a maximum width of 768 pixels. Why 768 pixels? Because this is, as you can see here in Bubble, this is a very typical breakpoint in Bubble, right? So this is basically the width that is typical for a tablet, for example. So we are going to use this exact value here. And what we are telling the browser here is that as long as the width of the viewport is 768 pixels or below, then the CSS classes that are contained in this media query should be applied, right? And if we go beyond 768 pixels in width, then the settings up here are valid. Okay, so let's modify the outer container. We are going to reduce the padding of the outer container to 10 pixels, padding on the left hand side and on the right hand side. So this here and this here, this padding will shrink from 50 pixels to 10 pixels if we go below 768 pixels in viewport width. Let's try it out. So we'll go smaller here, smaller, 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 and here we go. The padding has been reduced, right? So there's line break again. Let's see how we can replicate this in Bubble. So here we've selected the outer container. We'll make the container layout a row again, just like that. And also we need to modify the width of the inner containers. We need to do that for each and every one of those. Of course, there are plugins for assigning classes to these inner containers, to these elements in Bubble in general. But here we are doing basically a plain Bubble, right? So we need to modify each and every container. Okay, there's this line break 2. So we have this line break at about 660 pixels. And now we need to apply this media query to the outer container in Bubble. In order to do that, we go to the conditional tab of the outer container. And the condition would be the current page width is smaller than 768 pixels. Then the left padding would be 10 pixels. And the right padding would be also 10 pixels. And the nice thing here, you can see the effects taking place already because we are at a width of 710 pixels, which is smaller than 768 pixels. And if we go beyond 768 pixels here, then the padding gets larger. And by the way, I need to modify this condition here because in order to be exactly 100% the same as in HTML and CSS, I need to do a smaller or equal to 768 pixels. Okay. This is the same behavior as we've just seen in Codepen. Okay, some more modifications. So now we are changing the flex direction of the outer container. So we are telling the browser to make the flex direction a column if we are below 768 pixels in width or at 768 pixels in width. So just like that, you can see the effects immediately. And if we go beyond 768 pixels in width, then we are back to a row layout as I've defined it up here, right? So we go smaller, then it's a column layout again. And here, this doesn't look nice. This looks all squished to the side. So we are adding a few more things. We are aligning these items here, these children, along the cross-axis. The cross-axis would be here in that case, the horizontal one. We are telling them to stretch along the cross-axis, along the horizontal axis to take up all the available space. Like that. And the inner containers, they shouldn't grow along the main axis, but they should be aligned to the start of the outer container. So here at the top of the outer container. Again, justify content makes or determines how the children align along the main axis. The main axis is the vertical one because the flex direction is a column, and align items determines the alignment along the cross axis. Okay, this looks actually pretty nice and responsive, and I would like to duplicate this in Bubble right now. And this will be a little challenge, because one thing we cannot do, we do not have an option to determine the flex direction, or in Bubble it would be the container layout in this tab here, right? We cannot modify this property for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe it will be added in the future, but it cannot be done. And this is, to be honest, a little bit annoying. So there is no setting like this. There's container alignment, right? But that's not what we need. So what we need to do eventually is we need, as a workaround, we need to copy this section, this outer container. Well, create a new copy of that and modify the container layout in this copy to be a column. And then we will display and hide these two copies depending on the available screen width. So I will do that right now. Maybe it becomes clearer. So I'm going to copy outer container, and here I was trying to insert it, but it didn't work. And this was because I was in the responsive tab. In order to copy and paste elements in the elements tree, I need to go back to UI Builder. Here it works. So I've created a copy of the outer container, and I will rename my outer container to be able to distinguish them. So the one on the top will be named desktop, and the other outer container will be named mobile. So I will display the outer container called desktop when the screen is wide, and the mobile outer container will be displayed when the screen is small. So accordingly, the direction of this mobile container will be a column, and for desktop container it will be a row. Okay, so let's get a little bit smaller. Here the layout should change. So I'm selecting the mobile container. I'm changing the container layout to column layout. This looks pretty close to what we had in Codepen. And I need to update the condition of the outer container mobile, because again, I need to hide it if the current page width is above 768 pixels. If it's equal or below 768 pixels, then the element, the whole container, is visible. And if the current page width is above 768 pixels, then it's not visible anymore. And by default, this container, this element is going to be visible on page load, but again, it's going to be hidden or displayed depending on the screen width. And we are going to do the very same thing. Again, basically it's the opposite thing. With the outer container desktop, we are going to hide it if the page width is 768 pixels or below. And we are going to show it if it's above 768 pixels. So right now this is hidden because we are at 768 pixels. You can see it's hidden. And if we go above 768 pixels, here we got 807 pixels, then we can see the outer container desktop, but here below you can see that the outer container mobile is hidden. What we need to add is the collapse feature. So when this element is hidden, then it shouldn't take up any space. So we'll do the very same thing for the container above. And now let's see. Okay, so we went below 768 pixels, and this outer container desktop here above, it simply disappeared because we told Bubble to hide and collapse it. And if we go beyond 768 pixels, then the outer container mobile disappears and the outer container desktop appears. And well, I would say everything behaves quite nice and responsively, right? So we have the same behavior as in Codepen, exactly the same behavior, but we used a different approach to get there. So I think that shows two things. For one, well, Bubble's new responsive engine is powerful. It's not on par with what you can do in HTML and CSS and all this pro code. Of course, it's a low code tool, but again, it shows that there's a lot of things that you can do. And second, well, sometimes you need to play around a little bit, to experiment a little bit with Bubble in order to reach the same results as you would with HTML and CSS. So that's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, then give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, leave a comment. This would mean the world to me. Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye bye.